17. The Wasteland. Awareness. Seeping. Gradual. Thump. Sound. Thump. Regular. Thump. Familiar. Thump. Close. Thump. Heartbeat. Thump. 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 There was air in her lungs, strength in her muscles, and spirit in her flesh. And then she woke up. Ace sat upright, eyes snatching at her surroundings. The bedroom had survived. There was no sign of the reality rust, no damage save that inflicted by Winterdawn. Mundane light filtered through the window, making the room ordinary. Ace was suspicious. She had seen this place eaten. The hiss of hungry static chewing the walls lingered with her. So too did the buzz that had crept along her flesh when she too had been consumed. Her instincts whispered of the wrongness of the room around her. Winterdawn lay beside her, unconscious. He was alive and peaceful enough. Ace decided it would be best to let him sleep. She rose, stumbling to the door and pushing through. Then she locked still, her instincts chattering dangerously as she stared at the new world unfolded around her. She stood on a concrete expanse beneath a cloud-choked sky. Ranks of chimneys thrust around her, coughing thin streams of black smoke into the alien air. The air shivered around her as if her presence offended it. There was the smell of dust and burning in her nostrils, and an unhealthy watery taste in her mouth. "Shit," she said, concise and appropriate. The plane was finite. It had an edge, distantly. Spurred by her curiosity and irritated by her ignorance, Ace made for the edge. As she moved, she felt she recognized fragments of the world around her. Nothing tangible, just a sense of familiarity. She glanced down and found her feet planted on a carpet of vaguely familiar pattern. It had lined the passageway beyond the bedroom. Neutrally, she registered it before running on. She began to pick up on more details. She recognized decorations, ornaments, scraps of wallpaper from Winterdawn's house. Some seemed to have been abandoned haphazardly across the concrete plain. A pot plant decorated a niche in a wall. Regency wallpaper was plastered on a brick chimney stack. Another passage was glimpsed through a small, grime-covered window. Ace noted them all and ran. She clattered up a corrugated iron slope and was suddenly at the edge. She was on a roof, the roof of a factory. It was at the heart of a neatly regimented industrial complex of functional block buildings. Ace squinted, gazing into the distance, seeing towers and spires and shafts rising on the edge of the complex. They pushed awkwardly into the sky, helped or hindered by architecture which was impractical, unorthodox, and grotesque. Ace's eyes were met by a shock of urban styles, none conducive to sanity. She tried to follow the outline across the horizon, but her head began to ache with the effort. Some of the distant towers burned. Others seemed shattered, abandoned. Ace itched, feeling the laziness of the city, the absence of activity or motion. That was bad. Cities were supposed to breathe. Cities were supposed to bustle. A city without movement was a city without life. A distant tower creaked unsteadily on its foundations, toppled and collapsed. The factory rumbled sympathetically as the tower struck the ground. Ace teetered on the edge of the roof, grabbing at a nearby gargoyle to steady herself. The gargoyle fixed her with a scowl. The clouds above her seemed to shake, and a gap opened in them. Fire flickered in the gap. The sky was alive with light and motion and frantic, colourful frenzy, hidden behind the smoke. Colours weaved together, clashing and struggling incessantly. Ace grinned, enjoying what she saw, realising she was in no danger. She was moved by the sight. She treasured that feeling. It was rare. "It's beautiful." A voice came from behind her. She turned languidly. The voice did not threaten or invite danger. If anything, it was wistful. It belonged to a ghost. It was man-shaped but transient. It crackled and spat and faded between existence, sometimes solid, sometimes transparent, sometimes absent entirely. It was colourless. It was grey. The shape wore a hat, a coat, a shirt, trousers, all grey, all swam in and out of reality with it. "They are a sign," the shape pronounced. "There are powers so old they have forgotten what impotence is like. They are afraid." "Yeah?" Ace said, feeling too relaxed to add more. "The old certainties are suspended," the shape said. "The cosmos rests on them. Good and evil, light and darkness, time and space. White and black are dead. Now there is only grey." "You sound happy," Ace told it. She found its earnest tone curiously convincing. "So, what's going down? I mean, I went to sleep, and when I woke up—" She left her history unfinished. The grey shape flickered. Its voice grew melancholy. "There is no longer a house. Now it is part of cathedral, this city. The city dies, its structure burned away, its soul living only as a shadow. It must feed on the material world for strength and unity, so it overwrites the cosmos, absorbing the world slowly." Ace felt a flicker of irritation. "And what if the world doesn't want to be absorbed?" she murmured, as aggressively polite as she could imagine. "There will be a succession before any true damage occurs. The city is dormant. Maybe it will die, maybe it will rise anew. Who can say? It'll be interesting finding out." "You're keen on the sound of your voice, aren't you?" Ace tried a little open hostility. "Who the hell are you?" The shape flared, became almost solid. Its eyelids fell open. Ace clenched her teeth and turned away, too late to disguise the horror she felt. I am a shadow," it crowed, though its voice lost none of its calm. "And if I lived, I might be a friend. Remember that. And this. The people you travel with both live somewhere in this city. I wish you well." The shape crackled one final time and vanished. Ace shook, trying to absorb the implications of what the shape had said, hoping it was true. That was almost beyond doubt. The shadow told no lies, she was certain. He had been long-winded, but she didn't doubt his integrity. She smiled and turned and stared out across the cityscape, searching its buildings and its streets with keen eyes. She saw a wide road and, on a whim, she let her sight trail along it until it opened into a vast rubble-covered square. In the centre of the square was a wooden stage that had been smashed apart by falling masonry. That wasn't interesting. Her attention focused on the police box that sat on a pile of rubble beside it. She grinned again, a happy child. The square was close. If she could just get off this roof, she could be there in no time. She skirted along the edge of the roof, searching for a way down. As she ran, she called out with enthusiasm and energy. "Doctor! Hey, Doctor! She's alive! Denny's alive!" Her voice bounced off the factory walls, echoing in the canyons between buildings. If the doctor could hear her, he made no reply. She didn't care. She shouted at the stones, at the city. She didn't care who could hear. Just for once, she was really, really happy to be alive. Winterdawn woke, remembering everything. The haze was gone from his mind. Light touched his eyes. The tiredness was lifted from him. Only in his legs did he feel pain. Only in his legs and in his heart. Sandra was still dead. He had walked again, briefly, and now that sensation was gone forever. He'd sold his soul, his daughter's life, everything for false hope. Wedderburn was dead. He understood now. For the first time he realized what it meant. It upset him gradually. There had been too much death and suffering packed into the past few days. Tragedy had lost its potency, becoming only sad and spiteful. This couldn't get much worse. He opened his eyes and found a monster standing across him. He closed his eyes and whimpered. "Please, Professor," the monster spoke softly. He knew its voice. He opened his eyes and looked again, closer. It wasn't human. It might have looked human once, It even had a vaguely human shape and was wearing the remains of human clothes. It was a human body that had begun to decay. Flesh, bones, nerves, muscles, organs, all had lost their rigid structure and were flowing. The once human creature had become semi-fluid, rolling and rippling outside of its original form. It left a trail of wet, sticky flesh in its path. It was falling apart. It was Justin Cranley. "They've taken him apart," the thing spoke rapidly in tongues. "There's nothing left to hold him together. There's only us." Winterdawn's stomach lurched. He coughed blood. Cranley was like a cancer. His whole body was a loathsome cancer cell. Articulate and in pain. Horrible. "Justin," Winterdawn said quietly. The creature nodded, setting his flesh writhing in a manner Winterdawn would never forget. "We are Cranley and Truman and many others. Gabriel and Tanith brought us to life, and now they kill us." Fearful symmetry, Winterdawn considered, beginning to lose his horror of the Cranley creature and finding pity. "More fearful, maybe, than you imagine." Winterdawn frowned, trying to understand. He tried to stand, an automatic action. He managed to lift himself partly with his elbows, but this was too great an effort, and he collapsed wearily onto his back. "What have they done?" he whispered, half rhetorically. "They have destroyed your house." The answer was unexpected. He almost leapt to his feet in surprise. "What did you say?" "We'll show you." The creature leant forward and enveloped him with its ample flesh. Thin, tight limbs grew out of the bulk of Cranley's flesh, clinging to his back and shoulders, raising him slowly and painfully upright. Cranley held him in a curious parody embrace. Parts of Winterdawn felt repulsed by the sensation, others oddly comforted. Whatever Cranley had become, there was a part of him that he could like and admire. How often had Cranley held Sandra like this, he wondered. He had seen them walk hand in hand to Sandra's bedroom on more than one occasion, and had been touched by the close love between them. He had overheard them making love once, and had felt only a long, unsettled ambivalence. Only after Cranley's madness had set in had Winterdawn learned how cruel he could be, how vicious, how possessive. He stared into the eyes of the monster and wondered whether he was looking at an improvement. The creature, who had been Justin Cranley, carried the professor gently to the shattered window. Winterdawn stared out and saw a world changed beyond recognition. He stared, too numb to cry, too dull to feel anything. "I've seen enough," he said eventually. "Thank you." Cranley lowered him into an armchair. He sank into it, grateful for its familiarity and its soft surface. Cranley hovered over him, perhaps waiting for a lead. "Who am I talking to?" he asked. "At present, our name is Kzelek. One of us. I was a student once." "Ah," the professor's eyes shone. "So was I. Would you like to talk?" The doctor sat on a mound of rubble and hummed softly to himself. He regarded the new world around him with a curious eye, wondering what he could make of it. The TARDIS, its surface mottled and bleached with white dust, sat on a distant mound. It was the last link with the world the doctor remembered. Dormant though it was, the TARDIS had sheltered the doctor from the effects of the storm. It remained a rock, steady in an ocean of change where all else would be washed away. The doctor had clung to it desperately, fearing, perhaps knowing, that sooner or later the storm would smash him away from the security of the rock. But not yet. Winterdawn's house had gone. The doctor had emerged from the TARDIS once the storm had abated, and found himself here, in this city. The city disturbed him. The TARDIS had been put down among desolation, on a vast, black-scarred stone square, amid collapsed and gutted buildings and collapsed and gutted corpses. He had paced around the square slowly, the dry dust crunching beneath his feet. The city smelt of a summer day, of dead flowers. Its air tasted of dryness and lemon. Its sky was hidden by a blanket of smoke. Its buildings were hollow towers, soaring upwards, trapped in earthbound stones. There was no noise but the sound of his footfall, no breeze, no life. Even the bodies only appeared to be dead. On close inspection, he found that they had never been alive. They were bodies of flaking dust. That the city was dead disturbed him. That the city was desolate disturbed him. That there was nothing in the city but despair disturbed him. He had climbed onto the top of the nearest mound and sat down to think. Behind him was the TARDIS, before him a pond of stagnant water that had seeped up through a crack in the ground. His reflection was dark and melancholy on the water, obscured by a reef of scum. There was something regular and bulky pressed inside his jacket. Benny had spoken about a city that was inside the tetrahedron, or maybe was the tetrahedron. This city, he guessed. Benny had been alive there, might still be alive now, somewhere. He hoped so, though his surroundings did not encourage hope. "Happy, happy," came the voices of Gabriel and Tanith, striking the walls of the surrounding buildings, making them shake slightly. "Joy, joy!" The doctor reacted sharply, tumbling down the mound and pressing close against its surface. Gabriel and Tanith had wandered into the far end of the square. The doctor kept low, peering at them with keen eyes. He watched them leaping across the square, arms and eyes and mouths constantly meeting and parting. They were evidently in a good mood. The doctor's heart sank. "Look!" Tanith cried, pointing. "There's the TARDIS!" There was innocence in her voice, but not enough to hide the malice. The doctor crouched down further, watching carefully as brother and sister bounded across the square to the police box. He saw their movements become less open, more cautious. They prowled round the TARDIS, taking short and cramped paces, pressing hands to the door and faces against the windows, circling it again and again as if it had become the centre of their universe. The doctor crouched still, wondering how much of what he saw was genuine. Gabriel's palms pressed against the door of the TARDIS, stroking the paintwork with care and reverence. "Box of delights," he exclaimed. "Chariot of the gods." "Do you think he's in there?" Tanith asked. Her knuckles tapped lightly against the police box shell. The noise made was loud and hollow and unnatural. "Yoo-hoo, Doctor! Are you in there? Are you hiding from us?" "No need to be frightened," Gabriel joined in. "It's only us." Tanith kicked the TARDIS door. It creaked under the impact and the doctor winced, but it held fast. "We can't touch you," Tanith called. "Not there in your hole, outside the real universe. Now, you can stay the boring old sod that you've practiced long and hard to be, or you can be a pal and let us in for the party." There was a moment of silence. The doctor squinted, disturbed to see them wearing manic, inane grins. "Then there's something else," Gabriel hissed, low voice bouncing across the square, tumbling against the distant walls. "This is useless. From your time rotor to your fault locator, plastic, metal, and dead machines. Time and space don't exist anymore. We abolished them. Or are abolishing, or will. Throw your preconceptions in the air and guess where they'll come down." "So, there's us," Tanith added sweetly. "Only us. There is here and now and us. Pretty damn soon, us will own here and now. We'll make a toy of the universe. We'll make it spin and dance and giggle and break apart. We'll make a kaleidoscope of the world. Everything will mean anything and nothing will mean anything. You and your pretensions will be meaningless. Get out of your bloody shell and go with the flow. Otherwise, we might turn you into a deck chair or a wing and a prayer, and you wouldn't like that at all. And Ace will make a gorgeous snack. We'll swallow her down, bones and all. Or we'll flay her and turn her pelt into a colourful umbrella. And there's Benny too, lovely in body and soul. We haven't thought about what we'll do with her. We can do anything. We can go anywhere. We can be anyone. The doctor watched unfeeling as the couple locked hands and began to prance around the TARDIS, chanting. Their voices became a deranged howl, escalating towards a misshapen crescendo. Anything, anything, anything goes. Anything, anything, anything goes. Anything, anything, anything goes. They stopped, suddenly, sharply, staring at each other's faces. The silence between them was thick and obvious. The doctor tensed involuntarily. "He's not in there, is he?" Gabriel murmured. The doctor caught the words on dead air. "He's over there." Tanith waved an arm towards the doctor's hiding place. "He's behind the mound, by the pool, listening to us. He thinks he's learned something, silly man." The doctor decided that now was as good a time as any to break cover. He rose so that Gabriel and Tanith could see him. They stared at him as though he were something small but incomprehensible, alien to their experience. He hoped that was genuine. It gave him something to hope for. "Come and talk," Tanith said. She seemed lucid and sober. The doctor shook his head, edging slowly towards the edge of the square. His arm was still pinned inside his jacket, clutching tight at the bulk hidden there. He moved jerkily across the square, followed by Gabriel and Tanith's eyes. Their stares were full of ill-natured humour, as if he had stopped being strange and had become an obscure joke. His face stung red, with something like humiliation. It was there on Gabriel and Tanith's faces, a message for him. "You've been defeated, at last." A gap opened up between buildings beside him. He dived into it, into narrow cobbled streets that wound close and tight into the city. Here it was silent and less deadly. Gabriel and Tanith were not following him, but their voices were, howling and shrieking their triumph at him, bombarding him with shame. So he ran. He had learned something, he was certain. He had learned that, unless he had been witness to an elaborate act, Gabriel and Tanith could make mistakes, that they didn't know everything. He hadn't been defeated. Not yet. He clutched the shape under his jacket and ran on. Bernice Summerfield woke in the heart of a dead square under a dead sky. She recognized it slowly. This was Cathedral, her afterlife. She was surprised that it was still here. Then she stared around at the buildings which rose like tombstones and smelled the air that tasted of embalming fluid and felt a surface like hardening flesh beneath her back. This was an ex-city. It had popped its clogs, gone to meet its maker. He was dead too. She wasn't, though, and that delighted her. She tried to move her legs to lift herself upright. Her legs didn't respond. She stared along her body and saw why. Both hung limply from the half-closed mouth of a stone Mandelbrot head. She closed her eyes, hoping that when she opened them again the scene might have changed. It hadn't. It might have been worse. Chewed though they were, her legs were still attached to her body. She took comfort from this small mercy. "My God," she moaned softly, stroking her temples. "That must have been some party. What was I drinking?" She pulled her legs from the Mandelbrot's dormant mouth and waggled them in the air thoughtfully. Her left leg stung with pins and needles, but otherwise they seemed undamaged. The last of the Mandelbrot must have tried to swallow her. It had probably choked on her. "I'll never be cruel to a jelly baby again," she vowed solemnly. She kicked at a stone cheek with a flailing foot before setting herself upright. "So, you're one of the type who goes for the legs first. That's a sign of psychosis. It's what the doctor does." The head remained dark and dormant. Its mouth and eyes were dark hollows in the stone, not quite vacant. Benny peered closer and saw shapes seething in the darkness in the cavities. Wedderburn's orchids. She recalled them without much fondness or hatred. They seemed like something from the distant past. "Les fleurs de mal," she whispered to the orchids. But you're not bad at all. You're just misunderstood. The nearest of the orchid heads rose and spat at her. Ah, she said, losing interest. She patted a stone temple. I'll tell you this, she told the head in conspiratorial tones. You were a dreadful bureaucrat, but you could make a career out of being a rock garden. The head said nothing. Benny pulled a face at it and turned away. She almost wished she hadn't. A dead Mandelbrot was amusingly grotesque at least. A dead cathedral was bleak. The streets had cracked. The facades of the buildings had cracked. The towers had topples and some still burned like a funeral pyre in the distance. Benny no longer sensed rot in the city, save the clean corruption of death. She had killed everything. Or maybe the Grey Man had by sacrificing himself, or Gabriel and Tanith by setting the whole thing up, or... This was stupid. Who was going to argue about the responsibility for the murder of a pile of stones constructed in a vaguely logical pattern? She couldn't imagine the case getting to court. The Grey Man suddenly seemed to be at her side. There is more to a city, he seemed to whisper, than its stones. Benny spun round in shock. There was no one there. Her heart began to beat again. Winterdawn's bed was jammed into a crack in the street. A wardrobe Benny vaguely recognised lay broken open on its side nearby, spilling its contents. There was a lampshade and a painting, and an unopened bottle of wine. Benny recognised all from Winterdawn's house. She didn't think about it. She went for the bottle, holding it out for the Mandelbrot head's inspection. You wouldn't have a corkscrew on your person, would you? She asked. It gave no answer, but Benny had expected disappointment. She looked down at herself, and a thought flitted across her mind. These are my clothes, my real clothes from the TARDIS, not the Grey Man's idea of fashion. This is genuine 100% Benny Clobber. The second thought came slower, more tentatively. This was okay. It meant a lot more to her. This is my body. I'm not dead. This is my real body, the one with the aches and the pains, the one I've hung on to since birth. My soul and body have been smashed into each other. I'm back. I'm back, and arms and legs and head and everything. I'm alive, she told the head jubilantly. The plants within trembled ominously. I'm real. I am somebody, and you're just a head. You ain't got no body, my friend. I shouldn't joke, I know, but do you get anything other than hats for your birthday? I could quite fancy you in a straw boater. Summerfield? The head slurred. Benny slipped back in alarm, the bottle falling from her loosened grip and shattering on the paving stones. She stared at it wistfully. Now that's not fair, she pronounced. She stared at the broken glass and the pool of wine slaking the pavement. She felt suddenly sour. Like life, she added. We cannot move, the head rumbled on, voice churning uneasily. Exhausted is cathedral, moribund and immobile. As it dies, so die we. Benny said nothing. Carry us, Summerfield, the head pleaded, to the Cruach, to the seat of our power. If we might be restored, then the city might grow phoenix-like, become great again, return to the programme, world-saving and doubt-spreading. Carry you? Benny spat the suggestion. Please! I'm a delicate organism, not a wheelbarrow. Besides, you don't deserve it. The head rumbled, apparently frustrated. The plants in its eyes and mouth gibbered and thrashed. Not for us, Summerfield. For the programme, for the Grey Builder. Antipathy there may be between us, but also agreement on the programme. Listen, Benny said coldly, her voice and body tightening. If you wanted me to respect you or your programme, then there are some ground rules you should have stuck to from the start. For example, you should not have gone round chanting, Death to Summerfield. It's bad for my soul. The head howled. Benny turned away in disgust. A short, familiar figure tumbled round a distant corner. His clothes were stained with dust and water dirt. Despite his dishevelment, His body was bristling with energy or exhaustion. One hand was pushed into the folds of his jacket, clinging compulsively to a bulky shape concealed there. He froze as he saw Benny, staring dolefully and shaking. "Benny," he called, slightly suspiciously, "is that you?" "Oh, yes," Benny replied sweetly. "This is a genuine Summerfield, quite rare, and worth a bit on the open market." The doctor nodded abruptly, seeming relieved. He said nothing more, but seemed to have accepted her as genuine. For her part, Benny hadn't the slightest doubt that this could be anyone other than the doctor. Gabriel and Tanith were capable of many things, but she doubted they could fake him. She smiled wistfully, studying his face from across the cathedral street. She saw much on the doctor's face, a cocktail of nuances. It was difficult, as always, to tell what he was thinking. His eyes seemed wide and tired. She fixed on them intently, trying to seem calm. They stepped into each other, hugging briefly. It was a wary reunion, untouched by speech or humour. Cathedral wasn't designed for gentle camaraderie. Benny was comforted by the embrace. She was alive, the doctor was alive, they were together, and just maybe things were going to be okay. And just maybe the doctor felt the same. They swapped experiences slowly, stumbling over every word because every word might mean something important. As the doctor spoke, Benny found herself studying his face, finding new lines and worn patches. His eyes lacked their usual sparkle, grace and humour. There was a relentless quality in their place. Benny felt herself reflected in those eyes. The doctor came to his conclusion. Winterdawn's home was being eaten, great chunks being cut out of reality. The tetrahedron was at the heart of it. Maybe it was hungry. I ran to the TARDIS, where the hunger couldn't reach, so I was safe. The tetrahedron and cathedral are the same, Benny interrupted cautiously, as the doctor paused. Bit of a knotty concept to get your head around, but I can see odd bits of the house here and there, particularly here. It looks to me like the city has swallowed the house and everything in it. That's what I call an appetite. The doctor was nodding. That's what I thought, he agreed. Have you tried asking your friend? He indicated the last of the Mandelbrot set, whom Benny had introduced with good grace at an appropriate point in her story. The doctor had greeted it with a ferocious smile. The head had matched with stone silence. Only now did it speak. It recognized that it had their attention. Its hard arrogance was returning. It still grated in Benny's ears. True, it said. To survive collapse, Cathedral chews into the world, tasting and taking what it finds. This house was close. From this, Cathedral takes new structure until the old is restored. This TARDIS, being outside of space and time, was inedible. Now, to the Cruach Carius, so that Belltap, there's a good head, Benny suggested. She turned back to the doctor and found him grinning. Have I said something funny? Yes, the doctor responded innocently. You said the city and the tetrahedron are one and the same. But I took the tetrahedron with me. I took it into the TARDIS, where it couldn't be eaten. He made a baffling smile. Benny blinked. There was something meaningful here, but it eluded her. Do you know what I've done? The doctor asked. Benny plumped for honesty and shook her head. I've created a paradox. He pulled his arm out of his jacket. Sat on his palm, sizzling with a new yellow light, was the tetrahedron. Cities within cities, Benny heard herself say, her eyes caught by the pyramid glare. So, how does it help us? The doctor smiled again, his broadest smile in a long time. It gives us a leverage, he said. A woman was dreaming in the darkness. She was mad. The voices told her that. Gabriel and Tanith spoke to her, whispering the truth. She was a queen, wrapped in the one true flag. She was an assassin ruling over a mind in madness, wrapped in a dirty rag. She was a ruler of the red, white and blue land of do as you're told, of subjects who loved and cherished her, and would fight to protect her and to glory her. She would lead them willingly to war. Nations would fall before her advance. Then, when the atlas became too small, she would lead them into space. Imperial Earth, her dream. The dream of empire. That's right, a dream of empire, that's all it ever was, a dream. Assassin, said the voices. Crazy Jane. Here, sir, ready and waiting and willing for the number from 5, the ticket from 10, the voices, the real power, they who must be obeyed. I am here, only obeying orders. The people want blood. Blood is a part of them, has always been a part of them. It runs in their veins. What's a death camp but an efficient Roman circus? Blood is strength, nation is strength, pain is strength, liberty is absolute, hierarchy is truth, anarchy is chaos, blood, mind, soil. First, before I do this, sir, there is one thing I must know. Ask. We know everything. They really do know everything. My name. I must know my real name. Your name is Jane Page, Sally Carpenter, Elizabeth Pinner, Christine Dennison, Penny Holmes, Stephanie Lister. Page was a little girl again. Want my real name. Want. So they gave her a name. I knew it, Page sang. I knew it all along. So kill. Page took up her gun. Cathedral's day passed into night, and the sky turned rust red. The surviving towers of the city glowed dim white, failing to dispel the new depths of darkness. A few flames still flickered on the horizon, but there was little left to burn. Benny hugged herself, not against the chill, but against the night. It was a slow night, corpse cold. It was the last night of the city. Benny snuggled up against the immobile Mandelbrot head. Its stone exterior smouldered with dying warmth. It was better than nothing. The tetrahedron lay on the ground nearby, crackling with intense cold light. The doctor sat squat before it, hands dancing against its blazing surface, eyes closed and face calm in meditation, trying to change the world. So, Benny mused, he was sticking to what he knew best. He hadn't moved for hours. He didn't seem to feel the cold or the tiredness or the oppression or the hunger that Benny did. She was beginning to recall her time as a ghost with fondness. Little things like that hadn't seemed important when she hadn't a body to worry about. She said, forcing her numb lips into a smile. Humour is not appreciated, the Mandelbrot head rumbled. Benny grimaced, but deep down she knew it was right. It wasn't the right time for jokes or warmth. The cold would kill both. Besides, she was worried about Ace. She hugged her stone head and waited. Finally the doctor spoke. Dark, he murmured, his voice flute soft. His face was set and solemn, caught stark in the glare from the tetrahedron. Kneel to worship piled relics. Heart and soul become stone-dead dust. But there's nobody there. Tell me something I don't know, Benny purred without humour. The old system is dead, the doctor was smiling faintly. A skeleton remains, ragged corpse framework. It's enough. If anything wants to rebuild control here, it's enough. This is as we have said, the Mandelbrot began. You keep out of this, Benny warned it graciously. She turned to the doctor, a question forming on her lips. What about Ace? Is she here? Yes, she's faint, fading. I can't fix on her properly. There's something else, something much stronger than us, swamping us. Gabriel and Tanith, Benny considered. They were bound to be out in the city somewhere, loitering with intent. They seemed vague and ambiguous in her memory, as if they were something she had once dreamed. Ace, on the other hand, was stark and vivid, but Benny could barely remember the last time she'd seen her, or the last words she had spoken. They'd parted too abruptly. The doctor let out a quick gasp. Benny looked up wildly, torn from her thoughts. It's not, he pronounced. It's not Gabriel or Tanith. It's much bigger. A multiplicity of selves and souls. Many and one. It's beautiful. I don't think I've ever seen anything quite so... Oh! The doctor howled and leapt back from the tetrahedron. Concerned, Benny rushed forward to steady him. In the light of the tetrahedron, his face was blanched. She imagined she caught a glimpse of fear, of revulsion, of apprehension, of admiration, almost of love. And guilt, intense, fascinating guilt. Something inside her jarred. "What did you see?" she asked. She expected his reply to come slow and weak. Instead, his voice was strong and forceful, almost too strident for the doctor. She guessed he was trying to hide something. There was a dangerous quality to this lucidity. Par for the course, she supposed. "Patterns," he said calmly. "The pattern underlying everything. It's like a kaleidoscope. You and I, Ace and Truman, Gabriel and Tanith, Page and Winterdawn, and Cranley. Enough, maybe. I never thought murder could seem so beautiful." "Doctor?" Benny squawked, wondering if some spring had finally snapped in the workings of his mind. "I'm sorry. I saw something that disturbed me." The doctor apologized. His words came tumbling now, like stream water splashing down a hillside. "And that's rare. I saw a connection, clear and bold in my mind. It had always been there, and I was too stupid to see it. Gabriel and Tanith. I know them now." "Well, that's nice," Benny judged. "There's also this small question of stopping them." The doctor placed a soft, warm hand on her shoulder. He was smiling benevolently. Benny wasn't fooled for an instant. "I think we can afford to be obvious." "You stopped being obvious a long time ago," Benny hummed wearily. "Gabriel and Tanith have destroyed Cathedral," the doctor continued. "But its structure remains intact. I think they're waiting to seize that, to step into the places occupied by the Mandelbrot set. Imagine what they could do then. No, there's a simpler question. Imagine what they couldn't do. They'll take the universe apart. Nothing will mean anything. And I like things to have meanings." That sounded simple enough. "So, we field our own candidate for the job?" Benny suggested. The doctor nodded. Benny let her eyebrows dance questioningly. "What we need," the doctor explained, "is someone experienced, someone with a thorough understanding of the way this city works, someone with a head for the heights of power, someone utterly ruthless and determined, someone with a noble countenance." "Who's the lucky candidate, then?" Benny asked, feeling revitalized enough to try some dishonest sarcasm. The doctor smiled like the devil. He patted the immobile Mandelbrot head on its prominent nose. Benny regarded it with disgust. "Finally, you agree. Finally, you accept," the head twittered with renewed arrogance. "Doctor," Benny began, bristling with an anger and resentment. She'd told the doctor what the Mandelbrot set had done, how they'd run the city, how they'd sent the Grey Man to die for them, and then torn themselves apart in the ensuing panic. Hadn't he listened? "I'm not saying it's a perfect solution," the doctor shushed her. He continued, and the distaste in Benny's mouth was matched in his voice. "With our candidate here installed in power, I imagine Cathedral will declare total war on Gabriel and Tanith, and they'll destroy each other in the minimum time with the maximum effort. That's the way these things tend to work out." The head roared, its mouth swinging open and closed in rapid succession, crushing the flowers too slow to react. "Conflict swift and vivid, victorious we will be. Gabriel and Tanith will be crushed from their lives. Our eyes have seen the glory." Its face was unmoving, but Benny seemed to see it glowing with proud energy. She made her own face flat and contemptuous in response. "I know how you feel," the doctor whispered reassuringly, "but it's better this than Gabriel and Tanith." Benny stared at the jubilant head and wondered if that was right. "Carry us," the head crowed. "Carry us to our Kruak, to our throne. Carry us, King of Kings. Carry us, carry us." Benny took a weary step forward. The doctor seized her by the shoulders and flung her aside. She landed hard against her side on a pile of rubble, the doctor's modest bulk crashing down beside her. Her head spun round wildly, in time to see the stone head, last of the Mandelbrot set, King of Kings, vanishing in a fireball. Its voice soared with the flames, then died. A shower of pebbles fell across the square, one glancing sharply off of Benny's scalp. A few scattered stones remained to mark its passing. Jane Page stood on top of a mound of debris on the edge of the square. An old towel was draped reverently round her shoulders, a handkerchief covered her face, stigmata blossoming on the fabric over her eyes. Slung on her shoulder was a rocket launcher, its tube daubed with cathedral symbols. Benny guessed that it had been abandoned by the city militia during the fighting. "Death to all kings!" Page shouted, voice reverberating off the distant buildings. She hurled the weapon aside and pulled a gun from within the folds of her jacket. It was more compact than the rocket launcher, but Benny found it no more reassuring. "History is bunk," Page declaimed. "Burn everything. No one gets out of here alive." She descended from her mound and began to pace towards them. "It's a time for new learning," she announced stridently. "Practical learning of what is real and what is myth. There's no time for abstraction and no place for professors or doctors." Benny began to move aside cautiously. The doctor placed a restraining hand on her shoulder. She rounded on him, whispering harshly. "Doctor, she's blinder and madder than a bat that thinks it's Napoleon. I'm getting out of here before she starts shooting." "No," the doctor said calmly. "We're responsible for her." Benny frowned. "Don't think I don't know where you are," Page called. She was moving closer, pacing towards them with even strides. "I can't see you, but I know. They taught me how to use my hands and ears. She trailed off. When she began again, her voice was laced with sadness and quiet thought. "It's funny. I have to kill you, and I thought you were both already dead." "You don't have to kill us," the doctor said sweetly, "unless you believe Gabriel and Tanith." "That's right," Benny added. Page was close to her, almost in touching distance. "You've more in common with us than them, surely." "Oh, yes," Page said. Her voice had become weary and wistful. She slipped forward and placed a hand against Bernice's face. It was warm and smooth, fingers trembling, memorizing the details of the face. Benny didn't flinch, surprising herself. "I'll tell you, I don't want to kill anyone. I never did. None of us did. None of us who really believed." "You don't want to kill people?" Page's hand still played across Benny's face, but she felt secure enough to manage a few cheery words. "I imagine that's a drawback in your line of work." "Please," Page murmured. "No, we wanted to build a better world. But the people are shackled by their false beliefs. Even Marx recognized that. You know, the flower on the chains." "Not personally." "We realized that we would have to destroy the idea that there is anything special or unique inside people. We had to kill their souls. Maybe there's a clean way to do that, an easy way to suppress all the rubbish. That was our dream." "A dream to some," the doctor said, distantly. Page smiled. Her teeth seemed as lonely as ice. "We had to do it somehow," she blurted the words. "There's only one really effective way of killing someone's soul." Her lips trembled into a wistful smile. Her other hand rose to meet Benny's face, her gun lodged tight in her small fingers. Benny was suddenly and sharply afraid. Her eyes focused into the barrel. "You don't know how happy this makes me feel," Page said softly. The doctor appeared by Page's side. Benny saw his shape as a blur in the corner of her eyes, but paid him little attention. Her world had grown tight. The doctor, on its edge, seemed less important than death. In a smooth, casual motion, he seized Page by the shoulders and tipped her over. There was a gunshot, distantly. Reality, what was left of it, slipped back before Benny's eyes. Page was on the ground, stunned. The doctor crouched beside her, his hands pressed against his knee, blood seeping between his fingers. The pain on his face was vivid. "Jesus!" Benny pronounced, darting forward. The doctor waved her back. "A graze," he insisted in a heavy voice. "We have to go. She'll be coming round soon." Benny ignored his frantic gestures and stepped closer. slipping a hand round his shoulders and helping him to his feet. "We're lost, aren't we?" she murmured, glancing at his wounded knee and seeing that his diagnosis was accurate. "Everything's falling apart." The doctor shook his head grimly. With Benny's help, he began a slow hobble towards the edge of the square. "We try another approach," he suggested. "There's a better solution, one more final. It's not one I'm keen on." "Why not?" "Because I'm scared of the truth," he said. He glanced over his shoulder and turned back, speaking more urgently. "We have to find Cranley, and quickly. She's starting to come round." By the time Ace reached the ground, her exhilaration had given way to a heavy sense of foreboding. On the roof, she had been close to the sky. She could see across the city and felt free. Once her feet touched the earth, she had become shackled. The city was tight around her. She no longer had any way of gauging where she was or where she was going. The streets and alleys were endless and meandering, the buildings close and distracting. She slipped through the city, trying to keep track of herself in her mind, trying to move ever closer to the square where she had seen the TARDIS. The city came in short bursts around her. She caught fragments of architecture, of signs and symbols, of shapes in the distance. But no movement, no sound. There was diversity here, but it was sterile. She lost interest in what the city had to offer, preferring to concentrate on her own ends. The variety gradually became numb. Even the occasional bonfires of corpses slowly lost their morbid sting. She tried to ignore them, finding it disturbingly easy. She turned a corner. A figure, robed and masked, loomed before her, covering her with a revolver. She tumbled aside instinctively before relaxing. The figure was as dead as anything in the city. He was held upright by a rope tied to a lamp post and strung round his neck. The gun swayed as his arm swayed, as his body swayed on its makeshift gallows. "Oh, Christ!" Ace pronounced, frustration welling inside her. It was not the bodies or the death that disturbed her. It was the tragedy, the injustice. This city had risen up and slaughtered itself. There was no telling why. The only expression she saw was death. "What did you do?" she asked the corpse, as she prized the gun from his stiff fingers. It was an old-fashioned military revolver. She checked the chambers. 6 bullets. Shrugging off the sensation of distaste, she pushed the gun into her belt and moved on, leaving the corpse swaying pendulously. After that, nothing seemed to touch her. The city flowed by. She ignored it, and it ignored her. It opened into a square. The TARDIS sat on the far side. Ace stopped, regarding it without emotion. She had spent so long searching for it, and it hardly seemed worth the effort. The doctor wasn't here. Benny wasn't here. She was beginning to doubt that they were alive at all. Still, here was the TARDIS. It was better than nothing. She moved across the square towards it, trotting round the chasms, avoiding the bodies and bounding over the rubble. She stopped, listening. From nearby she caught sounds. The crash of water, screams of delight and excitement. Innocent sounds. She turned towards them, half suspicious, half fascinated, searching for their source. She climbed a mound of rubble and found herself overlooking an expanse of water. It was almost a lake, settled in a depression that had opened in the square. The water was an unhealthy shade, choked with black plants. Gabriel and Tanith were paddling in the stagnant pool, jumping and kicking and splashing to make ripples and waves. They had their backs turned to her, seemingly preoccupied with their fun. They laughed frequently, long and healthy giggles and squeals of happiness. Ace watched them with a bitter eye, waiting for the moment to break. Her hand hovered around her gun. Gabriel and Tanith were dressed as if this was the seaside. Their clothes were strewn casually along the shore, swapped for brief and colourful swimwear. Ace cast round, half expectant to see deck chairs, beach balls, windbreaks and ice cream-wielding tourists bursting out of nowhere to fill the desolation. The city remained drab and bleak, and for a moment Ace found herself preferring it that way. She turned back to Gabriel and Tanith, wondering whether their incongruous behaviour and clothes were just another obscure weapon they were using against her. They were displaying themselves, Ace realised. Their beachwear was incongruous because it meant nothing to them. It wasn't part of their style, simply something they happened to be wearing. They were showing off their bodies, their wonderful, custom-built, desirable bodies, flesh sculptures built from corpses. Gabriel was so sexy it hurt to watch him. Tanith had a body worth killing for. She had killed for it. Ace felt them pull at her emotions, jerking them to their whims and desires. She felt her body grow tight, hating them for manipulating her so casually, hating herself for enjoying the manipulation so much. Her palm pressed against her gun, learning its shape. "You two have got severe body fascism," Ace howled at them. They turned. They stared at her. Ace bit into her lower lip, feeling her body loosen and shake. They had snared her, and she was lost. "Only perfect people," Gabriel said blandly, "should do perfect things." "Of course," Tanith added, "perfection comes in infinite packages, but we like this brand best." They turned to each other, pulled their bodies together, became one body and kissed. Ace watched all the gory details, sneering. "You're sick," she called when the scene became unbearable. Tanith broke the kiss, broke the embrace. "If you've not got anything constructive to say, then kindly go and boil your head and let other people get on with their lives." Gabriel shushed her, pressed a forefinger to his sister's lips. It lingered there, and Ace felt her insides churn with disgust and perhaps a little frustration. She trotted down the slope to the shore, cautious of getting too close, but anxious not to lose her grip. Her hand still danced round her gun, wondering how it might be put to most constructive use. "We could make you perfect," Gabriel said suddenly. Ace looked up, realizing he was addressing her. "You're too late," she said, grinning. "I beat you to it. I made me perfect. I made myself Ace." She quite liked that one. Gabriel and Tanith wore patronizing smiles. They began to wade towards the shore, water glistening off their unblemished flesh and finely set muscles, the grim light catching their eyes and smiles. Tanith shook her head slowly, and a fan of loose droplets opened around her. Ace squeezed her forearms defensively, wondering why this seemed so familiar. Gabriel and Tanith met her at the water's edge. They seemed vividly real and colourful now, larger than life, dominating the drab square. Ace could smell tight, damp skin and feel the close warmth of their bodies. They were overpowering her with their selves. "We're going to make a new world," they said together, in a single melodious tone. "A world of fragments and bridges, of infinite experience and eternal delight. It will be our world, and you can share it with us." "You can have a palace," Tanith whispered seductively. "A shining pearl of a building, with turrets and spires and flags and everything. To keep you company, we will fill its halls and passages with an army composed entirely of stereotypes, or amusingly anthropomorphic furniture, or anyone you desire." Ace shuddered, not so much at the nature of the vision, but the allure with which Tanith spelt it out. "What about the doctor?" she asked, clinging to reality. "And Benny?" "A room of your own, Benny next door, and the doctor makes 3. Don't be so obvious. They're squalid people. They won't want to be perfect." They took her arms. Confused, she didn't resist. She allowed them to lead her into the heart of the pool. The water lapped round her waist, clinging to her clothes and staining them grey. Her legs grew sodden, heavy, uncomfortable. She didn't let it concern her, keeping her attention fixed on Gabriel and Tanith. Tanith stood behind her, hands clasping at her forearms in a manner that was either friendly and reassuring or designed to restrain her should she make a break for it. Possibly both. Gabriel stood in front of her, hands pressed against her thighs, warm eyes smiling down on her from what seemed like an impossibly distant height. Ace felt small in his shadow, crushed between their two bodies. Their hands were warm and wet. That was the most disturbing part. "We will show you something," Gabriel hummed. "If you are ever lonely, we will take you out on a dry-baked plain. We will walk for hours and chat about our feelings and memories, and we will come to a great overhanging rock, and we will take you into the shade of that rock, where we can be together for hours or days or weeks or years, forever. Doesn't that sound like perfection? Peace, freedom." "There's a price," he warned. "Perfection costs." "It's not much, though," Tanith reassured her. "Only a little thing." "Yeah? What?" Gabriel and Tanith smiled. They spoke in unison. "We want you to like us." Ace considered. Gabriel's face loomed over her, smiling benevolently, warm and caring, framed against the sky. At that moment, it could have been the face of God, smiling down on creation from a crack in an impenetrable cloud. His hands were tight at her hips, and his promise seemed strange and attractive in Ace's ears. She grinned viciously and spat into Gabriel's eye. "That's a no," she added. Gabriel and Tanith howled and tipped her up into the water. She felt herself fall, the hard impact of her body with the pool's surface, the sudden dragging, the dirt water clinging to the exposed skin of her face and her hands. Dreamlike, unreal sensations. It was only when she was fully submerged and her eyes began to flood with wet greyness that she realized what had happened. It had come in a short, self-conscious burst. It was happening now, not in some distant memory. It was happening to her. This wasn't an unfamiliar experience. The water was still and brackish, and she was cautious not to swallow, but she didn't panic. She shoved at the ground with her feet, kicking herself up. Her head burst back above the surface, and she caught her breath. Gabriel and Tanith grabbed her by the shoulders and pushed her back under. Again, there was the shock of coldness and dampness and water flooding into her ears, deafening the world. Gabriel and Tanith's voices reached her ears, muffled. Their hands still pressed down against her shoulders. One pushed her neck down, holding her head under the surface. She thrashed with her arms and legs, flailing at random. She kicked herself upwards. The couple's grip remained firm. How much air did she have? Enough to last a couple of minutes? It depended on how long Gabriel and Tanith planned to keep her there. After a couple of minutes, their hands remained clutched around her. Ace's world had become dizzy and came in short bursts between blackness. She would have panicked, but her lungs were empty and her energy at a low ebb, and Gabriel and Tanith weren't letting go. Two thoughts came quickly. Don't swallow the water, and don't pass out. She let her mouth open and fill. The world slipped away.